here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the chords of Rival Sons, and we're going to be looking at the acoustic side of Rival Sons, and we're going to be talking about Scott Holiday. And Rival Sons formed in Long Beach, California in 2009. And, you know, Scott had been on the scene since around 2000. I think he worked with a few groups before he formed Rival Sons. So he's definitely, you know, been active for a very long time, like the last 20 years. But most people, you know, really weren't aware of him until Rival Sons hit the scene. And this lesson is going to be all acoustic, and we're also going to be hitting some alternate tunings, open G and DADGAD, and kind of playing with different tunings. So if that's a new world for you, I highly recommend, you know, try it out and dive in. You can find tons of players: Jimmy Page, Joni Mitchell, Michael Hedges, and of course Scott Holiday, and tons of others that love using, you know, altered tunings and open tunings too. In this lesson, we're just focused on the acoustic side of Scott Holiday's music, but we are leaving, you know, like the big single note riffs and power chord riffs and all those fuzzed out, you know, electric things that he does. So there's a whole nother world to Scott Holiday's music. I'm just going to kind of zoom in on some of his acoustic, because he has racked up a lot of acoustic, you know, intros and songs and little instrumental, you know, interludes and different things in Rival Sons music. And I love electric guitar, but I also love acoustic guitar and classical guitar too. So there's a lot you can learn, you know, from somebody like him. And definitely, you know, we're going to be hitting a lot of, you know, open tunings, and we're going to kind of walk through, you know, some of the differences and really get our hands dirty, you know, with altered tunings and these slacked, you know, kind of chord voicings and droned open strings and all this cool stuff hiding in their music. I did catch Rival Sons at Hedges up in Chicago. That was back in 2013. And I was working for a website, and I was sent there to review the show. So I was technically working, but I was in the crowd like a fan. I was cheering and taking pictures and, you know, freaking out or whatever. They were phenomenal. You know, they came out. I think Scott had a whole fleet of, you know, Firebirds, orange amps, you know, arranged like in a wall, you know, 3 giant pedal boards at his feet. And Scott's definitely a big, you know, pedal fan, massive pedal boards, lots of, you know, retro effects and fuzz and overdrive tones and wah and all this different stuff. So he has this colorful kind of tonal palette, you know, with electric guitar. But then he has a colorful palette with acoustic guitar too, with all these altered tunings. Right, before I reveal what I played in the intro, I need to talk about the tuning first, so we can kind of start, you know, in the right place. So the song I played in the opening, which is the first example, is an open G, and it's down a half step. So there's kind of two, you know, difficulties there. First, you have to find open G, and then you have to tune open G down an additional half step. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is just moving to open G. So your low E is going to be tuned down to D, your A is going to go down to G, and your high E is going to go down to D. So we're only changing, you know, 3 notes or 3 strings there. The low E, the A, and the high E. Both the E's are going down to D, and the A is going down to G. And boom, there's open G tuning. With the opening, that was Face of Light from Pressure and Time, and we're in, you know, open G down a half step. And there's, you know, kind of an arrangement of guitars. You know, when you hear the very beginning of the studio version, it's kind of this gritty electric guitar, and then you hear an acoustic guitar kind of double it, and then before the verse starts, the acoustic guitar kind of takes over. So I'm just doing kind of a composite of both guitar parts, because the electric guitar is technically playing this. Comes in and you hear the acoustic and the electric together, the acoustic is technically playing some open strings, and that high E, which is technically now a D, so you have those kind of dreamy chords that pop out, and that's going to be in this tuning. That's technically a G flat major right there, and then an E6, then you're going to look at this, which that's going to be basically what, a B add 9, and then a D major 7. So it's really unusual, but you know, once you start kind of piecing some of these chords together, you'll see how that fits. Right there, just hit the open strings, everything except for the low E. And that's basically a G right there if you play, you know, all those strings open. And right there he's adding, you know, the first fret on the B and the second fret on the G. And that's going to be a G flat, sus2, sus4. Totally has a Zeppelin kind of feel to it or sound. And there he's taking that G flat, sus2, sus4, moving that up a whole step, and that's just going to be G major again. And then moves it down chromatically a half step, and then down another half step, and then the open strings. So you have that really cool, you know, almost kind of a turnaround. Honestly, I don't know how that song didn't become a massive hit. That's a great song, and it barely had a little blip, you know, after it came out. Completely confused about that. Great tune. Next up is the song Jordan from the album Head Down, and we're still in, you know, open G down a half step, and it's something like this. We're still using, you know, the open strings as a G chord. And there he's adding that G, or it's actually a G flat, but G flat, sus2, sus4. And then he's kind of shift sliding that into that G. So there's a little 3-chord kind of progression, you know, being implied there. Right there, just do an index finger bar, you know, from the A to the high E, avoid the low E, and then that's going to be E major. Then move that down to the 5th fret, and there's B major. And then the open strings, there's your G. The next example is in just regular open G tuning. So here's the chart of the image again to kind of help you see where we are. So we're just going from standard, we're going to tune 3 strings down, and then we'll find open G. Next up is the song Sacred Tongue, which is from the Rival Sons EP, and it's a great EP, by the way. And we're in just regular open G, something like this. And once again, we're in open G, and the first part, it's going to feel like we're playing around with D, but that's not D, you know, in this tuning. It's going to function as like a G major and a G9. creates this little melodic idea, you know, based around a chord. And then the fun begins, and then we have this. So that's like an E flat major 7. Root note's going to move from E flat down to C, and then that's going to become a C minor add 9. But I love that transition between the chords. Next up is the song Where I've Been, which is from the Great Western Valkyrie, and we're still in open G, and it's something like this. This is really interesting. I love that progression. It's so haunting and kind of mysterious. And these are all implied chords too that I'm going to rattle off and kind of name. But that first one, that's kind of like a B7 over D sharp, loosely. And then you're doing this. And that's basically E minor. And then you're going to move down to G. Kind of hitting, you know, kind of targeting like part of a scale there with those open strings, but that's kind of, you know, flirting with G. And I like how he adds that hammer on there with the open G string. Second time the fill's a little different. He kind of swings it and then do it again, and then this is tricky. He's going to move up to this, and that's going to function as an F flat 5, and that's just kind of a, you know, your fingers are all smashed together and you have to make sure you let the chord ring, which I think I just flubbed that top note. There we go. And then move back, and you're going to basically fret like a D major shape here, and you're also fretting the 9th fret on the A string, and that's going to function as an E sus4. And then just strum everything except the low E open, and there's your G again. But that's an interesting little chord progression. And that's tricky because your fingers are all packed and kind of tucked in there, and it's very tight. It's definitely a great workout for your fret hand too. The next example features a different tuning. We're going to be in DADGAD, and we're going to be tuning DADGAD down a half step. So here's an image I made to kind of help you get your bearings and figure out where we are. So the first image is going to be standard tuning to DADGAD, and then the second image is DADGAD to DADGAD down a half step. The next example is from Nava, which is from the Head Down album, and we're in DADGAD down a half step, and there's this massive Led Zeppelin, you know, influence here. Something like this. Keeps going, but with that first part, we're basically alternating, you know, and we're in DADGAD, so we're hitting the open D and the second open D, you know, the low E string and the D string, and that reminds me of Going to California, you know, big time, from Zeppelin. But then, you know, Scott's kind of added this new melody to it. this real bluesy kind of sound. You know, and he's kind of just playing that little melody, but then with the two Ds kind of bouncing back and forth, you know, an octave apart, it kind of gives you that complete picture. Something like that. And that's kind of like D flat 7, technically. You know, if you think of the tuning and what's actually happening there, it's almost like a little blues lick. After that, he moves down here, and the next part has this. And there he's really just once again playing a melody, and there's a lot of open strings kind of encircling the melody there. It's definitely tricky. You know, you've got, you know, a melody that's moving, you've got the open strings that are kind of being hit and ringing. And if you haven't really played parts like that before, that's very demanding. You know, you're definitely working both hands at the same time. It might almost feel like you're playing piano or keyboard, but you're playing guitar. Really cool stuff. All right, the last example is in drop D tuning, which is very popular. You know, almost everybody watching this should be familiar with drop D, but here's an image just in case there's someone out there that doesn't know what drop D is. All we're doing is just changing the low E string and moving it down to D. Just going to tune it down a whole step. But there is kind of a curveball that Scott threw in to this guitar part, and we'll reveal that in just a second. The last example comes from the song Feral Roots, which is from their most recent album, Feral Roots. And it's in drop D tuning, just regular drop D tuning, but we have a capo on the 3rd fret. You know, so leave it to Scott Holiday to kind of throw out a curveball and just twist, you know, something that's so familiar to so many, but then, you know, throwing a capo on the 3rd fret does kind of shake it up a little bit. But Feral Roots is something like this. Pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. By far the easiest example in this entire lesson. But I guess I'm kind of showing the more recent, you know, material. But that is an interesting guitar part. So the first part, that's kind of revolving around E minor. Kind of playing with, you know, the open strings and kind of creating this little melodic idea. Something like that. And then it's going to move where it feels like you're playing a D. But that's basically E5, like an E power chord. And then add your middle finger right there, technically on what, the 6th fret, you know, the 3rd fret if you're thinking of the capo. And that's going to be E minor. And then move your index and middle finger down a set of strings. That's going to feel like a C sus2, you know, back here. But in this tuning, that's actually a D major 9. And I love that little, you know, simple progression right there. Really cool. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the chords of Rival Sons, or the acoustic side of Rival Sons. And definitely there's a lot of electric guitar things that Scott Holiday does that's really interesting, aside from the effects and the fuzz and the octave and the vibrato and swirling modulation effects and everything else. He has some killer, you know, single note riffs and power chord riffs and bluesy, kind of fuzzed out, funky things that he does. But I've discovered that his acoustic side is where all the textures and really interesting chord voicings and tunings, you know, kind of pop out. And with electric guitar, he sticks more with kind of just regular, bar chords and major and minor chords, and of course single note riffs. And then acoustic, whenever he kind of shifts gears into acoustic music, it's almost like Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page would do all these great single note riffs and power chord riffs and everything, and then he'd pick up an acoustic guitar, either in standard tuning or some wacky, alternate tuning, and he would come up with all these real dreamlike, ambient and exotic chords and tonalities. And I love that, where they pick up a different guitar and it's almost like they become a different player, which is really cool. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.